Hi, Nick Dogan, Oregon State Law. We safeguard your professional license so you can get back to business. Today's question is what to expect if you receive a complaint from the electrical board. I talked about the types of people that are most likely to file a complaint with the electrical board, and there's some really good information in that video regarding that. So please check out the video regarding who is most likely to file a complaint against an electrician in North Carolina. But in regards to the actual process itself, so somebody, whoever it might be, files a complaint with the electrical board, and then the executive director and his staff, should he choose to delegate, are tasked with essentially processing that initial complaint and initially figuring out if there's any legitimacy to it. So the executive director is going to work in conjunction with a board staff member, which is going to be an investigator with the board. And they're going to figure out, hey, there's nothing here. This is just some kook that's trying to get some attention, and they may dismiss it. They could turn around and after, speaking with the investigator, the executive director may say, you know what, I think there's something here. And they can draw up essentially a notice of violation. And a notice of violation is exactly what it sounds like. It's going to lay out what codes and or statutes are alleged to have been violated. It's going to have a number of alleged facts in there. Just for an example, it might have some information about, we think that you use 1099s with these unlicensed contractors, and here's basically the facts that we've been able to come up with at this point, and this is part of the allegation, and that those are going to be in the notice of violation. Some notice of violations are going to be pretty lengthy, but it really depends on how much goes into the investigation, right? Because if it's a simple investigation and a simple complaint, it's going to be short. If there's a lot of alleged violations and a lot of information, then it's going to be quite lengthy. So at some point, if it goes the route of continuing with the notice of violation, it's likely that the investigator for the board, whoever's handling the case, will come to the licensee and say, hey, I've got this notice of violation. Here's everything in here. Let me go over this with you. And there'll be basically a resolution portion. It's going to be towards the bottom, and it's going to have like certain terms and conditions. It could say, hey, we're going to implement this X amount of fine. Let's just say if you agree to pay a $2,000 fine, there'll be probationary conditions. You got to keep your financials open for us for 12 months, subject to inspection, and you've got to do X, Y, and Z. A lot of times what they have in there is going to be required anyways, like the open book stuff notwithstanding, but some of the other things would be like, make sure that you pull a permit. Okay, well, you already have to do that. And they'll have some other similar things within there that you're already required to do. But the biggest thing is going to be twofold. You don't really want to jump into something without really understanding, A, what you're reading, and two, what your other options might be, because you could jump in and go, all right, this sounds pretty decent, and you sign it, and then you're kind of locked in, and you've got to kind of scramble around to see if you could have any other options still available to you. So it's always best to kind of consider what all the options are. And if that's going to be the best option for you, then it's the best option for you. And you can definitely kind of resolve everything and get it wrapped up and sign that notice of violations with the resolution portion and be done with it. If you look over everything and you're like, man, I don't really like this, then you've got some more options down the road. So what will happen next is it'll go over to the review committee. Review committee is made up of 2 to 3 members of the board, and they will decide, on whether or not something is a legitimate complaint or not. Most of the time, I will have to admit that the review committee will say, all right, well, we agree with the executive director and board staff, and we're going to make our own proposal. So they'll, make a proposal over to the licensee. At that point, you really have to check everything that you get, because the proposal from the review committee typically has a deadline to accept or reject it. So you want to make sure that you read over everything carefully, because you are going to be working under deadlines, And if you get a really good opportunity to get something resolved, with the review committee, you don't want to lose that as well. And you don't want to, you know, have to go to the next stage if it's really not going to be beneficial for you. So you really got to pay attention to what the board sends you. And on a side note to that, don't ignore the board. If the board asks for something, don't ignore them. There's one of those things where if you get something in writing, don't just throw it in your digital trash or throw it in your physical trash. Pay attention to it. Or if somebody emails you from the board, don't ignore it. That's just going to upset them. Trust me, it is really going to leave a bad taste in their mouth. So, where I'm getting a lot of this information is in their admin code. They've got pretty clear procedure laid out for at least the beginning and end stage, beginning, middle, and end stages of their procedure. And it's 21 NCAC 18B.0902. I think there's 4 subsections, A through D. A is really good, and then C is really good. Those are going to be most of what we're talking about right now, but obviously every subsection under there, under .0902, is going to be really important. But most of what I'm talking about now is going to be like A and C. But anyways, you can check that out for yourself. I'm going to leave a link in the comment section. Not the comment section, the description section. And there's also a statute as well. I'm going to leave a link to that one. The statute pretty much mirrors what .0902 says, but it just doesn't go into as good of a detail as what the administrative code says. So, but make sure to check that out as well. That's going to be in the description section also. So, all right. So say you get the notice of violation with the resolution portion of it from the board's investigator and say, no, I don't want to sign that. Then it goes to the disciplinary committee. They come back, or disciplinary resolution committee. They come back, and then you're like, I appreciate that offer, but I don't want that. So where do you go now? You got a couple options. You could just say, I'm not going to get this resolved. I'm going to go to a hearing, and you can go that route. You can also say, hey, I want to talk about this with the disciplinary committee. Can I schedule an informal meeting with them? And then, yes, you can get an informal meeting with them. You'll sit down with the members of the board that are on that committee. Usually it's about 2 to 3. Most of the time when I do these meetings with them, there usually is 3 people there, but I have been to some where there's just 2. And then there's going to be board staff is going to be there as well. And then there's also going to be the board's attorney is also going to be present. And board staff is going to be the executive director. And it's also going to be the investigator that's handling that case. And with these informal meetings with the electrical board, what you're looking at is an informal presentation of evidence, an informal presentation by the licensee of any sort of mitigating factors or any sort of evidence that they have that counteracts what the board has themselves. So you can get information from the board ahead of time. That's one thing that I really like about dealing with this board compared to a lot of other boards, is that they don't really shy away from giving you information. They'll give you documents and things like that. You just have to ask. And the biggest thing is, make sure you ask, make sure you review it ahead of time. They do a good job of keeping everything organized. And then, make sure that if you're going to be going to this meeting and you have documents that you're wanting to present, make sure you share that with them. Because the last thing that you really want is everybody scrambling around at the last minute, not having looked at anything that you've presented. Like, say you've got really good evidence on your side that shows you didn't do the thing that you're accused of. Well, you want to get that to them as soon as possible so they can review it and go, you know what? We were missing this. Thank you for providing it to us. We're going to dismiss this, or we're going to implement a lesser, potential penalty or sanction against you. So, but if they don't have that information, then how are they going to know, what that key piece of evidence might be, for example? Or if you've done a lot of really good mitigation and I kind of messed this one up, but here's what I've done to correct that to make sure it doesn't happen again. And you've got really great policies and procedures. You've been doing things a correct way for, a certain set of months prior to the review committee meeting. And you want them to review that ahead of time as well, not just seeing it at the last minute and kind of like glancing at it here and there. So get your information get your documents over to the board as soon as you possibly can, and then that can be used at an informal meeting with the review committee. So let's say you get done with the review committee, they come back to you and they say, all right, well, we're going to want, X, Y, Z. And it could be anything. It could be a reprimand. It could be a suspension. It could be a revocation. Revocation could be on the qualifier license. It could be on it could be a temporary revocation and you can't reapply as a qualifier, and then you keep your individual license. Probably not likely. It could be revocation of both qualifier license and the individual license. So you want to obviously avoid things like that, suspension as well. There's also the possibility of monetary penalties, fines, and then probationary conditions as well. Typically, their probationary conditions are going to include having to complete at least one, if not two, courses relevant to what the alleged infraction was. And then it's got to be completed in a set time frame, and that course or courses are not going to count towards your continuing education. And it's probably going to cost you, probably a couple $100 or something along those lines, or maybe a little bit more. But you're gonna have to get it done. You got to get it done, and you got to get it done in a certain time frame. So with those probationary conditions, there's also going to be some oversight. Typically, there's some oversight if there's probationary conditions. What that really looks like is, and again, this depends on your infraction. The board might, it just goes back to unlicensed, hiring an unlicensed contractor as a 1099, for example. If something like that pops up and there's probationary condition, 9 times out of 10, they're going to want to take a look at your financial books and your payrolls for 6 to 12 months. So you're going to have to keep that open. Some of the other probationary conditions are going to be things that you already have to do. And I think I mentioned that earlier. So those are kind of the list of some of the penalties that they can implement against you and some of the sanctions. And say you get something like that and you say, all right, well, I agree to this. You can then get a consent order in place and you can kind of knock everything out and you're done. There's also the possibility that the disciplinary committee comes back and goes, you know what, this was such a super minor thing. You've been licensed for 10, 20, 30 years, whatever the case may be. You obviously corrected any deficiencies and you did it pretty quickly. We're just going to agree to, dismiss this. And I've seen them do it informally sometimes, like, hey, you do this course, we'll dismiss it. And that's kind of like a conditional discharge in the criminal realm, same type of deal, but on the licensing side of it. So that is an option as well. And sometimes they'll just flat out dismiss it. It really just depends on the situation and the evidence presented at the informal. The other option is, if you don't like any of the options you've gotten thus far, you can say, no, I want to have a hearing, and you can have a contested hearing. They'll set a date out, usually a couple months away. They don't meet every single month for hearings. I don't remember the time frame. I think it's bi-monthly or at least quarterly for hearings with the electrical board. And then obviously you're not going to be the only one having a hearing, so yours might get pushed off for 6 months, maybe 9 months. It really depends. It might be a little bit longer. It just depends on their availability and how many other cases that they have. In the meantime, though, while you're waiting for the hearing, doesn't mean you can't keep negotiating. And that is something that you can do. If you hire counsel, then you want your attorney negotiating with their attorney. If you're doing it yourself, you can negotiate directly with their attorney. It's probably a better idea to have somebody on your side that knows how to do this type of stuff representing you, and then can negotiate and kind of understands and has a rapport with the other attorney, with the electrical board. So here's what we'll do. I hope everybody learned a good bit about the process with the electrical board. If you have any questions before you give my office a call or text, check out the other blogs on my website. That's northstatelawfirm.com. Check out the other videos on this YouTube channel. And if you still can't find what you're looking for in either one of those spots, then please give my office a call or text, 919-521-8810, and you can get a free 15-minute discovery call with a member of my staff. I hope everybody has a fantastic day, and keep the lights on in North Carolina. Bye-bye.